Abhay, I think nobody will join, but you start.
In the earlier classes, students have not been joining.
I think one lady used to be, little bit.
Okay, so fight 1 minute more and I'll start. Okay, I'll start. So,
Abhay.
so today we are going to be doing unit 26, 27, and 28. I think I've clubbed all the three units because they all deal with African diaspora. We are looking at North, East, and West African diaspora. Now, Africa becomes a very interesting diaspora because for a simple reason, remember the modern human being evolved in Africa. Uh, Earlier theories were East Africa, but now they are saying there were multiple sites in Africa where modern human being evolved. Even, in fact, human being has been on this planet for almost a million years, which were the earliest modern human being was about 1 lakh years. Large movement of humans started about 100,000 years ago. That's the modern human being, the Homo sapiens, within and outside Africa. Still controversial study of it. So essentially, if you look at it, actually every human being on this planet is actually an African diaspora or would have some African gene because the whole planet has been populated by the early human beings. Early exodus from Africa is such a differentiator that it is a step towards seen as a step of the diasporic process. Though the early migration of the Homo sapiens or the modern human being is not actually considered in terms of diasporic studies. African diaspora first appeared in the 50s, broadly defined to include all global communities descended from historic migration since the 15th century. So they put a cutoff date. So as we keep talking about the fact that in scholarly pursuits or academics, you need to figure out the context, you need to figure out the scholar, you need to figure out the cutoff dates, because otherwise, the perspective can be vast. So there needs to be some cutoff date. So 50s is the cutoff dates to include migration from Africa, the prehistoric out of Africa migration that led to peopling of the world, more narrowly defined only to the transatlantic. So 15th century onwards, it started off with the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, most of the North America, South America, Europe, not less of Europe, but predominantly North and South America, was the transatlantic slave trade done by the European colonizers, by the European traders. uh, uh, Important role that blackness, slavery, colonialism, racism, geography played as sustaining the transit. So, and when we subsequently in the second year study about human trafficking, we realize the fact that everything that is happening today has a history. Nothing has happened suddenly. There is nothing which happens suddenly. There is always a history, and that history gets refined. Things remain the same in a particular way, created by migration of merchants, traders, slaves, soldiers, and other parts to Europe. And also remember, slave trade was one, but there was migration subsequently in 15th century. In fact, in the Mughal Empire, there were Africans. There was a Habshi Empire in east of India. We still have people from African descent in India. Who have over the period of time become a part of the Indian culture. They maintain their own distinct culture. Long before Christopher Columbus started journey, different size population of African origin in India, Portugal, Spain, Italy, they were everywhere. And essentially, as we keep talking about the fact the history of human being is a history of migration, in spite of the the political anti-immigrant sentiments in the Western world or the global North. The point is that throughout history, humans have been migrating, and they continue to migrate. So, history of African diaspora started with the Atlantic trade in African slaves, 15th century. Now, we need to also understand when this African trade started, there was no nation states in Africa. So essentially, a precursor to the slave trade was, Africa is composed of various tribes, ethnicities, and there was constant war with each other. And when there was war, the winning tribe would take the young men. They used to either kill them and take the women and children and sell them as slaves. So the slavery has been a part of the traditional society, which was then, weaponized or commercialized in the form of slave trade by the European traders. Almost 11 to 12 million uh, African people supplied up to 2 lakh African people to different societies and up to 11 to 12 million to Americas. So, 12 to 15 million, and that's a rough estimate. I mean, I'm sure there would be, the actual estimates might be vastly different. Was active from the kingdom of Dahomey, a Western African kingdom. And that is why East, North, and West, to read together makes a lot of sense. Economies of the states were heavily dependent on providing slaves for the European traders in exchange for various forms of good. Made illegal in the 19th century. In fact, when the slave trade was made illegal, British came out with a concept of indentured labor. Essentially, it was a different name. More often than not, it was very much like slavery. However, that's the way it was. This was one of the outposts in, I think, Ghana coast, Gold Coast, which was where ships used to dock. The the upper quarters were for the European traders, and there were this underground decks where the slaves were kept. Cultural theorist George Alexander Shepard was of the opinion term African diaspora did not emerge in the Anglophone world till the 50s and 60s. Though African diaspora already existed before that. But again, you need to understand the fact that because Africa was ethnicity, tribes, they were kingdoms. The concept of modern states came much later because a lot of Africa was colonized by the Europeans. So let's start with North Africa. Countries such as Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Morocco, Sudan, Tunisia constitute North Africa. Labor migration started in the as early as 15th and later. And all these countries, more often than not, were colonized. Recent changes in migrant have had a large effect on the number of migrants currently moving within the sub-region. And as we talked about yesterday also, there is a whole lot of movement south to south, north to north, but a large focus is happening on the movement from south to north. That is because there is an identity politics being played out. This is what is North Africa. Morocco, though in a lot of times Mauritania out here becomes a part, uh, but technically North Africa is these countries. Now, these countries themselves are split up, and we will see how world leading labor frontiers on the border between rich countries of European Union and Gulf Cooperation Council. So North Africa becomes uniquely positioned. Here is the Gulf Cooperation Council, and here is Europe. We'll see in a subsequent map demand of EU and GCC. So here it is. Here is the Gulf Cooperation, and here is Europe. So a lot of times migration happens typically this way: Syria, Turkey into Europe, or Turkey out here goes this way. And then there are these different names for these countries. So there is Maghreb and Mashriq. Maghreb is the western part of North Africa. Mashriq is the eastern part. And part of it is the Arab world. So you see how identities are so split up, including a large part of Sahara, excludes Egypt and Sudan, which are considered to be located in Mashriq, the eastern part of Arab world. So this is Maghreb and this is Mashriq, the eastern part of the Arab world. Ethiopia is not the Arab world. Then this is the Arab world. Restricted its scope to the Atlas Mountain and coastal plains of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, was expanded to Mauritania. So this is Mauritania out here. So these definitions keep on varying, and look at the way this identity works out. So there is an Arab identity, there is a Islamic identity, there is an African identity. Then there would be typically white Arabs. There would be the darker Arabs, the darker Africans. So color then plays a part, and how things all these plays a part in the migration scenario. Then there is MENA, the Middle East and North African, as a geographical region whose countries are often referred to by MENA in academia, military planning, disaster relief, media planning, and business writing. Number of cultural, economic, and environmental similarities across comprising. So MENA is Middle East and North Africa. And remember, Middle East is also West Africa when we were doing the diasporic studies. In the earlier units, it was also done West Africa. In fact, more people use Middle East rather than West Africa, West Asia. So composition of North Africa and diaspora, 1830 and 1920, 1962. European colonization of North Africa, settlements in Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Libya, majorly French, Spanish, and Italian. And we've been studying in various units how these colonization then picked up a channel between the colonizers and the colonized. And it became a process for the colonized people to go to places, to migrate to places which were the colonizer places. So you'll find a lot of Indians in, let's say, Britain, a lot of Algerians in France, and so on and so forth. While majority of European citizens left after independence of these countries in the 50s and 60s, existing social and economic has created way for future emigration. So you'll find a lot of Algerians who are in France. They are French nationals. 60s and 70s emigration to France, but also to Germany, Netherlands, Belgium boomed. Reaction to recruitment policy for the European countries. And typically Europe, after having fought 2 world wars, after having lost a lot of young able-bodied people, also because of destruction, also because of the fact of demographic, they didn't have those demographic dividend as the global South had, needed people. And that's how immigration was one of the ways to handle their countries. The so-called guest worker migration of that period provided North Africa diaspora the foundation for subsequently family and students. In fact, now besides the guest workers, there are a lot of students who go to Europe from global South, which form a diaspora out there. Mid-70s and early 80s, Algerian emigration decreased. Government enacted an immigration stop in place till 85. Emigration from Morocco, Tunisia remained high. And we had yesterday only studied in MDI 1 the economic determinants, the economic and the non-economic determinants, why people migrate, various theories on migration. And predominantly, there is a large economic angle to that migration. With global South having more poorer people, more dire straits, more hardship, or in conflict, leading to migration. Identity, equation of identity is not straightforward, as Arabic speakers equivalent to Arabic people. Maghreb that speak Berber or Amzigh, I don't know how to pronounce it, Amzigh, and a dialect called Darija with clear French and Spanish accent. And that's the interesting part. Over a period of time, there is so much of mixing which has happened. And then when this anti-immigrant or anti this or and this identity politics take shape, it is a self-defeatist move for both the host and the home countries. Being Arab is also no alternative or even black to being African. So there are all these mixtures which are happening, and it has been happening for years together. I mean, if you look at history, as I said, if each one was to test our DNA, we would definitely have a part of African genes, because all of us, in a way, are African diasporas. So the unit talks about a couple of diasporas. Let's look at the Moroccan diaspora. About 5 million Moroccans live abroad, majority being located in Europe, especially France. That was because Morocco was a French colony, center of migration. It has hosted different people, being crossed by migration flows, sent its own national to the world. France with 33%, Spain 26%, Italy 16% host countries, Belgium, Moroccan population is the largest percentage wise. 5% Moroccan expat live in distant North America regions, only 6 live in other MENA countries. So, and this is a pattern which we'll see in country by country, region by region, that there are people all across. They might be a minority someplace, but in a larger minority in other places. Moroccan migrants ease the country's chronic unemployment problem. And again, a very similar thing across all the global south. Unemployment problem, invest in home countries. Remittances are there. Remittance allows the families to improve their standard of living, invest in nutrition, in food, in education, which might lead to more migration. Moroccans abroad send home remittance worth about 6% of national GDP. Usually retain close links with Morocco, help in less direct ways to forge trade, third-party investment. Transnationalism is that example. And as we go through, diaspora by diaspora, country by country, region by region, you will see very similar patterns. Changed considerably since Second World War, when blue-collar workers moved to Europe to help rebuild. Population of Moroccans live abroad, increasing comprise highly educated young professionals. Again, a pattern which you will see across regions, across countries. Let's look at Tunisian diaspora. Tunisia has long history of emigration to European Union. Again, as I said, once colonization happens, a link got established between the colonizer and the colonized. And inevitably, when the colonized countries became independent, the colonizer country was the first choice of for emigration. Tunisia has long history of emigration to European Union, skyrocketed early to 2011. In fact, 2011 was when the Arab Spring happened, started with Tunisia. Obviously, chronic corruption, unemployment, civil war in neighboring Libya prompted hundreds of thousands of Arabs, Asians, Arabs, and sub-Saharan African, and inevitably, then countries become conduits for people from other countries to go through. Whichever country is easy to go through, people will take that route. Studies about how migration policies can constitute an asset for authoritarian regimes in European neighborhoods to consolidate their power. So now, migration policies also can work in multiple ways. You can encourage migration, make control over the migrants, use your area as, a corridor. Particularly has dissected the role of civil society actors, how they can both resist and reinforce European externalization goals through actions on the ground. And again, things are much more complex on the ground than straightforward as one would like to see it. So various researchers have found out various ways things happen. So for example, I'll tell you about a complexity. The North American free trade agreement not only allowed goods to move between Mexico, US, and Canada, but it also allowed human trafficking. It also allowed drugs to move. So, every action or every policy or every agreement, one needs to figure out the intended consequences, the unintended consequences also. Because inevitably, there are always unintended consequences with intended consequences. Tied to revolutionary movement, freedom of mobility was a core request of the revolution. Politicization of migration and civil attempts at liberalizing policy remains unsuccessful a decade after revolution. So, and essentially, states, irrespective of the fact that in transnationalism, we look at the fact that the power of state has reduced, yet the state is the most powerful and single most powerful entity because it controls the flow of people or mobility of people. It can stop or allow people to move. Now, that is a very powerful thing. Let's look at the Egyptian diaspora, most populous country with population at 97 billion. Egypt is also the largest regional provider of migrant labor to Middle East, using immigration as a soft power tool to advance its foreign policy. Again, something which we have seen country by country, region by region. Destination for thousands of Arab and African immigrants and a major host of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, Sudanese, since 2011, Syrian refugees. So it also in the modern world is very important for countries in a particular regions to collaborate with each other because any political disturbance in a neighboring country will impact a country. So and somehow states are still not looking at this globalization aspect that everything is connected to each other, and this particular identity politics affects everybody. Rare until Nasser came into power after overthrowing monarchy in 52. Egyptians do not emigrate. Again, there would be some reason, and there are never deterministic reasons. There are multiple reasons which, thousands of Egyptian professionals were dispatched across Africa and North America, aiming to host countries, but also to support Egyptian regimes, foreign policy aims. So the country actually looked at emigration as a foreign policy thing. At the same time, Egypt also experienced an outflow of Egyptian Jews and a large number of Egyptian Copts. And also, we realize the fact that there is a lot of mixing in terms of sex, in terms of religion. For example, if you have been seeing the news, there is a fight in Syria going on between the Syrian army, which is Sunni, and Druze, which is more like a sect, has elements of Islam and Christianity or Judaism, one of those two. So and then there are other tribes, and each nation has so many complex identities that if a nation state does not take everybody along, then there is bound to be conflict. Egypt's liberalizes immigration policy led to millions of Egyptians pursuing employment opportunities abroad. 80s, many emigrated to Iraq, Kuwait, mainly for economic reasons. Once the oil boom happened, as did Indians, especially, it started off with the southern with states. It started with Kerala. Subsequently, today, even northern states, Indians are emigrating to the Gulf. 2011 Egyptian around the mobilized extensively in context of the Egyptian revolution. And we've also looked at the fact that now with globalization and transnationalism, diasporas play a very important part in the national politics. They are not only invested in a host country, but they're also invested in home countries. End of 16, Central Agency for Public Mobilization states that there are 9.47 million Egyptian expats, 6.23 million Egyptians live in Arab world, 1 point in America, 4.7 contribute actively to development through remittances, circulation of human and social capital. Again, something which we'll see country by country, region by region. Because inevitably, when a person travels, migrates, it is not that the links break. There are links back home. Inevitably, today with the globalization, those links are maintained. It's a real-time link. Those links then lead to social and economic dividends. Additional challenge with, again, with abuse, exploitation, ill treatment of Egyptian workers in Arab states. Think of the fact that, irrespective of the fact they might be Arabs, they are split in terms of identity, a national identity. For a part, object to what they call Saudiization of their culture due to Saudi Arabia. So you see, in spite of a common Arab identity, there are further splittings. So there is never a homogenization of either a diaspora or the domestic population. Twice, Libya was at the brink of war with Egypt due to mistreatment of Egyptian workers, and after signing of a peace treaty with Israel. Was subject to harsh measures, expulsion by Iraqi government, to violent attack by Iraqis. So, when we study each individual diaspora, now again, these diasporas or Egyptians in other countries might face some other issues. So let's come to East Africa. These are the various countries in East Africa. In fact, the unit does not take all the countries. They are taking only a couple of countries. In fact, among our class in this migration and diaspora studies, we have a student from Mozambique also who has taken this course. So, in fact, in one of the classes, he gave a brief on Mozambique and the number of Mozambique students and other people who come to India. There are a lot of medical tourism which happens from Africa to India. So, all these countries composed of Eastern Africa. 19th and 20th century, East Africa became a theater of competition. So you will see again a repetition of colonization as we saw in Asia. British acquired what is Uganda and Kenya, and that's one of the reasons a lot of Indians were found in Uganda and Kenya. In fact, after there was an anti-India sentiment in Uganda, a lot of Ugandan Indians then moved to the west. Uh, in Kenya, there are still a lot of Indians there. French settled the largest island of Indian Ocean, Madagascar, along with a group of small islands nearby. Germans gained control of large area comprising of Rwanda, Burundi, and mainland part of Tanzania, named after Tanganyika. Political boundaries did not exist in pre-colonial area, was interactive. In fact, Africa was the theater of the evolution of modern human being. And then, if you see the migration patterns, which I showed you in one of the earliest classes of MDI1, a lot of migration happened after the evolution of human beings. Linkage to there's a lot of linkage to tribal and ancient culture, frequently used as a region of mass migration. Violent conflicts and poverty is endemic. Conflicts are there. Political uncertainty leading to more migration. Associated with low human and economic development. So the question always remained the fact that when today, when Europe and the Western world practices identity politics, and they focus on all these immigrants coming in from Africa and Asia, why doesn't Europe then invest in improving the socio and economic conditions of these countries which had colonized earlier? These questions are never brought out in mainstream media. What is brought out is the number of migrants which are coming and how they are creating and then a security lens is put out there. So there are a lot of East African diaspora figures in the US, in Europe. Ilhan Omar is a Somali American. Lupita Nyong'o is Kenyan Mexican, Somali Canadian, Sudanese British entrepreneur, Ethiopian entrepreneur, founder of Soul Rebels. So, and what we were talking yesterday also in terms of how uh, economically it is a very sound investment for immigration to happen, and any state or any politics which goes against immigration is not sound economics. Challenges faced by East Africa and discrimination and xenophobia, legal and immigration issue, cultural identity, brain drain. Something similar, what we see in Asia, possibly more with Africans. It again depends on people, it depends on countries, it depends on the state. When the migration happened, cultural identity is always a very tricky thing. Migration, if we look at even an internal migration, cultural identity becomes a major issue. So in the Eastern Africa, a couple of countries, diaspora has been taken in the unit. Kenyan diaspora, low per capita income, rising income inequality, business opportunities in the neighboring country encourage Kenyans to migrate. Large number of Kenyan migrants are in Asia, America, and Europe, migrated to Caribbean, Australia, and New Zealand. Inevitably, we also will look at the fact that every individual or family has their own strategy in negotiating their deprivations or disadvantages to migrate, to move to a perceived better opportunity. Large number of Kenyan outflows of migrants reported in Uganda and Tanzania, which are neighboring states, are linked together, trace back to it. And then we look at the Tanzanian diaspora, 18th and 19th century. And again, a common pattern. The neighboring countries are the first where people go if there are better opportunities. Whoever is able to create a better opportunity or better infrastructure for migrants, people will move. For example, historically, India had always been a host country for all persecuted people across the world. And all these immigrants enhanced or created a much refined Indian culture. Unemployment and poverty has become a driving index. Look at Ethiopian diaspora post 70 phenomena. There are more than 3 million Ethiopians scattered throughout the world: America, Australia, Norway, South Africa. Reside in US, Arab, Middle East, Israel. Currently, more than 250,000 Ethiopians live in US. Outbreak of the Ethiopian revolution, and again the common patterns: civil unrest, political instability took place during the 70s. Then there was a leftist operation, the Red Terror, 80s, refugee crisis, many take food shortages, hunger crisis from 83 to 85 led to an estimated 1 million famine deaths according to United Nations. So we are talking about 20th century where all these people were dying because of famine. We are currently looking at a famine in Gaza because of policies of the West. Refugees, Ethiopia has 15 pilot countries to implement a comprehensive refugees framework, easing pressure on host countries, improving refugee self-reliance. 7 of these pilot countries are in Africa. And unless the global countries or continents come together to figure out how to handle civil unrest, how to handle climate change, how to handle refugees, humankind will stumble from, and this migration will be a continuous issue. Colonial ties plays an important role in shaping patterns. Ethiopia was one country which was never colonized. does not share these ties with either African or European countries. So migration patterns do not follow a well-defined route. Very interesting thing for Ethiopia. It was never colonized. Migrated to Middle East, women account for 95% of all legal present migrants from Ethiopia in the region. Have often been employed in construction, farm work, and perhaps as drivers and mechanics. So individual countries, and then if you research further, you will find out how chain migration happened. One person goes, then calls other people, and then you suddenly realize there are a lot of people from the same clan, from village, from the family, etc. Signed bilateral labor treatment with Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE to increase legal migration. Forced return and complaint of abuse abroad. Government of in 2013 banned Ethiopians from traveling to the Middle East. Point the ban was lifted. So we are also seeing, a pattern of abuse in Middle East. We have seen that in from Asia migration also, because Middle East follows this kafila system whereby there are recruitment agents. Then these recruitment agents mistreat immigrants. Return migration to Ethiopia has increased over recent years, often involuntary as a result of large number traveled irregularly to find work, have become more restrictive. So, border policies, border checks to increase restrictive practices, then gets people to come back and try again. Top financial remittances destination in sub-Saharan Africa, 5% of the country's GDP. Important source of foreign currency and livelihood for all families. Very similar patterns as we saw in Asia. This is what constitutes West Africa. So if you notice, a lot of countries in the western part of the African continent has been missed out, but that's how the unit have been structured to get you a general feel of the various diasporic movements. Many countries have been missed out. If you and because there is a regular pattern and a repetition, these countries have been missed out. This is what is West Africa. And these were the places where the slave trade outposts were there, because this was the Atlantic Ocean, and from here then the slaves were taken to the Americas. Almost 11 to 12 million people. 12 million people. 17 countries, one-fifth area of Africa, about 400 million people, victim to slave trade and colonization for thousands of years. Kingdom of Ghana was the first empire. And again, remember, history of human beings, history of places. There have been empires, there have been kingdoms, there have been states. Then there was colonization, and then independence happened. But a lot of states are still under, political conflict. Soso Empire, Bali Empire, Songhai Empire based in Gao emerged as a superpower, led to the emergence of several small states. Portugal, France, and Britain emerged as a major trading partner, and they played a major role in the slave trade. So for all these European nations coming out with democracy and all that stuff, actually it becomes ironical because they were the initial players to lead all these illegal practices. French and British were major powers during colonial rule. West Africa battleground. After World War II, there were several nationalist movements. Ghana was the first country to gain independence in 57, a good 10 years after India's independence. Instability, political corruption, famine, still suffer from poverty, epidemic of diseases, lack of medical care, and unemployment. And these are all push factors for migration to happen. Similarities in terms of dress, cuisine, musical genres, djembe drums. Djembe drums is very popular in the Indian drumming circuit also. Islam, Christianity, Judaism, there are several variations of indigenous religions formed as a result of individual cultures. So there is ethnicity, there are tribes, there are indigenous religions. Three main periods of West African diaspora. First wave forced, which was the transatlantic slaves, 16th and 19th century, about 12 million slaves. Second wave voluntary, third wave voluntary. And you would find some parallels with the Asian diaspora. For example, South Asian diaspora, very similar patterns. For indentured labor was not exactly a slave trade, but it was forced. Those people were illiterate. They were made to sign bonds. Has to contend with another important notion, the concept of modern nation state to which to belong to, in order to deal with the political and cultural sections of travels. So, with the coming of a state, a nation state, now there is a new thing one has to deal with. And what happens with tribes or ethnicity which span states? That the concept of nation goes beyond the state boundaries. Then there are other issues which comes in, as we are seeing possibly in terms of the Indian state of Manipur, where this conflict between two tribes, and one of the tribes is there in like for example Kuki is also there. Members of Kuki tribe are there in Burma, which is Myanmar today. During the closing decades of 20th century, Britain and France, the old colonial superpowers, and many countries host large number of West African diasporas. Poverty, violence, and underdevelopment, a very common keyword across the global South. Result of process, recent increase, which is an alternate viewpoint, recent increase, which we also studied yesterday, that economic betterment of the home countries does not stop migration. In fact, it increases migration because now the people have resources to migrate. Increased young West African capabilities and aspirations to migrate, likely to continue in the future. Increasing income, education, and access to information. And then there is an aspiration to do better. Humans always have aspirations to do better, whether it's real or perceived. Everybody aspires to do better. And wherever they see there is an opportunity to do better, they will take it. So in West African diaspora, a couple of diasporas are listed out. Let's look at Ghanaian diaspora. No official definition of Ghanaian diaspora, very broadly or in a very narrow sense, referring to all people of African descent, particularly African American diaspora, in an effort to attract resources and potential foreign investment. So most of the slave trade happened from Africa. There were no nation states. So all these African Americans, actually, where do they belong to? So Ghana has said, use that to attract these African Americans to come back. There is also a narrow understanding of the term Ghanaian diaspora to Ghanaian citizens who left the countries in different parts of the world. Neglecting the huge number of Ghanaian communities residing everywhere in Africa. Something very similar to Asia. India, for example, a person coming in from US or the West is looked at a higher status than somebody coming in from Asia, from let's say Nepal or Afghanistan or Thailand, does not have that kind of a status. Educated middle class and the unskilled working class who had left the country during turbulent years, trend among Ghanaian diaspora elites to return back to their home countries. Even in the middle and working class Ghanaian migrants to return back in the country. And inevitably, people will come back only when they sense that there is some opportunity of doing good to themselves. The country becomes a secondary factor to doing to themselves. There's an opportunity. Have become political and business elites. About 60% of the country's political elites and middle class were trained and educated in the West at some point of their career. This also is a trend that we are seeing in a lot of diaspora, returnee diaspora in various global South countries. China has attracted a lot of their diaspora to come back and set up industry. In fact, today the cutting edge work which is happening in China is because of all these returnees back home. India Apollo Hospital was an American Indian returned back. Did Ghana's year of the return attract foreign visitor? She quit her job as NYC lawyer to move to Ghana. So these are news items. Ghana did pretty well on that. Let's look at the Nigerian diaspora, ambiguous, not as straightforward as it appears. 250 ethnic groups in Nigeria. What we saw in the South Asian diaspora in terms of Afghanistan. If you look at India, Indian diaspora itself is not unique. There are Telugu, there are Tamils, there are Punjabis, there are Bengalis, there are Oriyas, Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, Fulani are the most dominant ethnic groups, challenged by minority ethnic groups. So identity becomes a very important way and then if identity politics is played, leads to political tensions. Measuring exact size of diaspora, actual value of remittance. There are about 15 million Nigerians in the diaspora, an estimated 25 billion in annual remittances. Compare it with India, India has almost 60 billion in annual remittances. Are the most educated immigrant group with 61% holding at least a bachelor degree. So when studies are done on these stock migrants rather than flow, you will figure out what kind of immigrants are staying in a country. Actor and filmmaker Chevitel, I don't know how to pronounce this, EGO4 was born in East London to parents of Igbo descent. Grammy winner Sade was born to Ibadan, Nigeria before moving to Essex. Tina Tempe is an entrepreneur, rapper, and singer. Young family leave in order to offer more opportunities. As we keep talking about opportunities to their children as well for higher education, Canada, US, UK, popular destination, Australia, Germany, Spain, Italy, and South Africa. Whichever is able to give a better life is where people will migrate to. Obasanjo, the former president of Nigeria, July 25th as Nigerian Diaspora Day, recognized. Again, as we talked about, every country in the world today recognizes the diaspora and the power of diaspora and wants to engage with policies, with various, things to maintain that connection and to attract them. Involved in nation building, entrepreneurs and professional various sectors, several categories under Nigerian diaspora, people of Nigerian descent, Nigerian immigrants, expats, etc. Again, something very uniform or repetitive across countries. Three large ethnic groups: Igbo Americans, Yoruba Americans, typical Telugu Indians, Telugu American Indians, Tamil American Indians, Malayali American Indians, Punjabi American Indians, common known as British Nigerians. And there are two categories: British people of Nigerian descent and Nigerians of British descent. So that also becomes a subdivision and a subcategory. So let's sum up. largely refer to describe voluntary and involuntary dispersion of people. And inevitably, the African diaspora started cutoff date 15th century, 1950s onwards. 1950 onwards, 50 and 60s was the time, because earlier than that, all those transatlantic slave trade was not considered as a diaspora, even though technically they would be diaspora, but the diaspora cutoff date was the 50s. North African countries are countries of origin, transit, and destination from sub-Saharan Africa. Migration and security policies driven by various migration patterns, domestic economic demands, number of young people from North Africa making. And we have also studied the fact that it's obviously the young which migrate. The older do not. Also, today migration, there is a feminization in terms of migration. More and more women tend to migrate. West African diaspora, three main periods: forced, voluntary, and then voluntary. Then there are historical diaspora, there is contemporary diaspora, popular and active community of people formation. In Asia is the key development in recent past. So obviously there are a lot of Western African diaspora in Asia. Cultural impact on their host society. Ghanaian and Nigerian have been the central focus of diasporic studies, known as Africa's Gold Coast, where Nigeria is named as Giant of Africa. There are some reference and suggested studies. And a great way to understand diaspora is to look at media in terms of literature, in terms of movies. Yesterday, I was giving the example of Namesake. It's a Meera Nair movie on this Bengali couple who migrated to the US, how their identities, their culture, and then their children, how they negotiated the identity problem, what happened, how complex it is. It is obviously complex to to move from one place, go into a different culture, and then if there is a difference of language, food habits, religion. So there are these books, Women in Africa and African Diaspora. So one can look at these books, and that is that. Okay. Let me switch on my video. Hi, Supriya, any questions? Supriya, any questions? Can you hear me? Would you like to put on a question in the chat? Okay, I think Supriya is in some situation where she can't write or chat. Nevertheless, so in case there is any question, you can put it in the WhatsApp group, or send a mail. In case you need the PPT, send a mail to me. You can have a PPT and go through the units. You don't need to, as I keep saying, these keywords will allow you to craft an answer for your assignment as well as for an end-term examination. Okay. In case there is no question, I'll close this session. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful week ahead, and we'll meet each other next Saturday with MDI next units of MDI 1 and MDI 3. Bye then. Thank you, Sada sir. Bye.